Crestview wasn't the kind of town that made national headlines. It was the kind that swallowed secrets whole, letting them rot beneath the surface. Everyone knew the rules. Keep your head down, don't ask questions, and never, ever challenge a police officer's authority. For decades, the Crestview Police Department had operated unchecked. The badge wasn't just a symbol of law. It was a weapon. And for those who held it, justice was whatever they decided it was. Ethan Grayson knew these rules well. He had grown up here, in a town where power flowed in one direction, and questioning it meant painting a target on your back. But after 12 years in the military, 5 of them in special operations, Ethan had learned another rule, one drilled into him through years of war. Never let fear dictate your actions. That's why, when he saw the cops harassing a teenager at a gas station, he didn't look away. It was late, past 11. The streets were empty except for the steady hum of a police cruiser idling near the station's entrance. Ethan had stopped to refuel after his evening run, his German Shepherd Max sitting alert in the back seat. As he swiped his card at the pump, he noticed 2 officers cornering a high school kid against the wall near the convenience store. The kid couldn't have been older than 16, was trembling, his hands raised in surrender. Ethan couldn't hear the full exchange, but he caught enough. "That's a nice jacket," one of the officers sneered, tugging at the Letterman jacket the teen wore. "Where'd you steal it?" The kid stammered, his voice barely audible. I'm on the football team." The second officer leaned in closer, his voice dripping with mockery. "You got ID to prove that?" The teen started to reach into his pocket. Big mistake. "Hands where I can see them," the first cop barked, stepping back like the kid had pulled a weapon. Effen's pulse ticked up. He had seen this play out before, overseas and at home. The game was rigged. The kid was already guilty in their eyes. Ethan weighed his options. If he intervened now, he knew how it would go. A black man stepping between cops and their target? Crestview's history had already written that ending. Instead, he pulled out his phone and started recording. The officers didn't notice at first, but as Ethan subtly adjusted his stance, positioning himself where his phone had a clear view, one of them turned. Their eyes locked. The cop recognized him. Ethan saw it in the flicker of hesitation, the way the officer's grip on his belt tightened. Then came the stare, the unspoken challenge. Ethan held it. For the first time in years, someone in Crestview wasn't looking away. Ethan Grayson had spent years learning how to read a battlefield. Even when the terrain was asphalt instead of desert sand, he could feel when a situation was shifting from control to chaos. And right now, standing at that gas station, he knew he had just stepped onto enemy ground. The moment the officer locked eyes with him, the mood changed. The tension in the air thickened. Ethan kept his phone steady, still recording, but his instincts were already screaming at him to brace for impact. The officer, Sergeant Victor Kane, turned fully toward him, his posture stiffening. The second cop, still holding the teenager against the wall, glanced over his shoulder. For a second, neither side moved. Then Kane took a step forward. "You got a problem, soldier?" Ethan didn't flinch. He kept his stance neutral, voice calm. "Just making sure everything's above board, Sergeant." Kane's lips curled into something between a smirk and a snarl. "Put the phone away now." Ethan knew the game, knew how they expected him to react, either back down and comply or escalate and give them an excuse. He did neither. "I'm within my rights." The teenager, still trapped against the wall, looked between them, eyes wide with fear. He saw what was coming before Ethan did, because Kane was already moving. A hard shove, a trip of the leg. The impact of Ethan's back hitting the concrete happened faster than his brain could process. His phone skittered across the pavement, the screen cracking as Kane's boot came down on it. "Get on your knees. Hands behind your head." Ethan's pulse spiked, but he forced himself to stay still. Max barked frantically from the car, sensing the shift in his handler's demeanor. "Sir," Ethan said carefully, keeping his hands visible, "I haven't committed a crime." Kane crouched down, his face inches from Ethan's. "You just did." Before Ethan could respond, a fist crashed into his ribs. The pain came sharp and immediate, but his training kicked in before his body could fully react. He exhaled through it, refusing to show weakness. A knee dug into his back, pinning him down. Handcuffs snapped onto his wrists, tight enough to cut into skin. The second officer walked the teenager toward the cruiser. "Stay quiet about this, kid, and we won't have to come looking for you later." Ethan fought to control his breathing. He knew this playbook. Officers talking just loud enough for their threats to be heard but never recorded. The small crowd that had started to gather kept their distance, no one willing to get involved. Kane hauled him up, shoving him toward the back of the squad car. "You should have minded your damn business," he muttered. As the door slammed shut behind him, Ethan realized the truth. He wasn't being arrested, he was being disappeared. Ethan Grayson had been in tight spots before, captured behind enemy lines, pinned down by sniper fire, stranded in hostile territory, but somehow this felt different. Because this wasn't a foreign battlefield, this was home. The Crestview Police Department smelled like stale coffee, sweat, and something rotting beneath the surface, not just in the air, but in the system itself. Sergeant Victor Kane dragged Ethan through the precinct like a hunter displaying a trophy. The officers at the desks barely looked up. Those who did either smirked or quickly looked away. No one was surprised. No one cared. Kane shoved Ethan into a holding cell. Hard. He stumbled but stayed on his feet, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him fall. "Welcome to Crestview's finest accommodations, soldier." Kane's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Hope you get comfortable." The metal bars slammed shut. Ethan exhaled slowly, assessing the battlefield. The cell was cramped, occupied by 3 other men, all black or Hispanic. None of them looked surprised to see a new arrival. An older man with weathered eyes and a scar along his jawline leaned forward. "What'd they get you for?" Ethan shook his head, standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. The man chuckled darkly. "Ain't that the story of this whole town?" From down the hall, Ethan heard Kane's voice, louder now, like he wanted to be overheard. "Yeah, guy was acting real suspicious. Probably high on something. Resisted arrest, tried to grab my gun, dangerous as hell. Lies." Every word. Ethan clenched his fists, feeling the familiar burn of restrained fury. He had been trained to resist interrogation. He had been trained to withstand psychological warfare, but this was different, because here the rules didn't apply. Footsteps approached. A young female officer, Officer Julia Brooks, paused at the cell, holding a clipboard. Her eyes flicked to Ethan, then quickly away. "Need to document his injuries for the report," she mumbled. Kane smirked. "Sure, Brooks. Knock yourself out. Just remember who signs your paychecks." Brooks stepped inside the cell, kneeling next to Ethan as she pulled out a small first aid kit. Her hands were careful, but he could feel the hesitation in her movements. Then, in a whisper so soft he barely caught it, she murmured, "They won't let you out." Ethan met her gaze. For the first time since his arrest, he saw doubt in a police officer's eyes. She was afraid, but fear could be cracked, and that meant the system wasn't unbreakable. Ethan Grayson knew that in a fight, the first real blow wasn't thrown, it was landed. And right now, the first hit had just connected. Lauren Grayson's article dropped at 6 a.m. sharp. By noon it was everywhere. The headline was a gut punch. "Decorated veteran arrested and beaten in Crestview. Where's the accountability?" The article detailed everything. Ethan's service record, the lack of charges, the police department's history of excessive force. The town was waking up, and so was the Pentagon. Calls were being made. Veterans' organizations were demanding answers. Even a senator had retweeted the article calling for an immediate investigation. Inside the precinct, the walls were closing in. Sergeant Victor Kane felt it first. His phone buzzed constantly. Calls from the mayor, the police chief, even city attorneys. Each one was asking the same question: what the hell is going on? The answer was simple. They had picked the wrong man. Inside the holding cell, Ethan heard the shift before he saw it. Guards were nervous now. They avoided eye contact, spoke in hushed tones. He knew this game. People only acted like this when they were afraid of the truth getting out. Officer Julia Brooks entered again, this time moving quickly. She knelt beside Ethan, pretending to check his injuries. "Your sister just blew the lid off this place," she whispered. Ethan held her gaze. "Then you need to decide whose side you're on." For the first time, Brooks didn't look away. Then she stood and left without another word. But she didn't leave empty-handed. Inside her jacket pocket, her fingers gripped a flash drive, one containing body cam footage that was supposed to be the same footage that would expose everything. The department begins to crumble. By mid-afternoon, a group of senior officers met in the back of the station. Kane slammed a file onto the table. "We need to control this, now." The room was tense. Some officers nodded in agreement, others exchanged uneasy glances. One finally spoke. "This is getting too big, Kane. The feds are looking, the press is here. If we keep pushing—" "If we don't push back, we're done," Kane snapped. "We just need to handle Cole before this gets worse." Silence. Then someone asked the question no one wanted to say out loud. "What does handle mean?" Kane exhaled slowly, looking at the men in the room. "We make sure he doesn't walk out of here." Another silence. This one heavier. Because now they weren't just covering up a crime. They were planning another one. Ethan Grayson didn't need to hear the conversation to know what was coming. He had seen this exact moment before. Not in a precinct, but in war zones. When desperate men realized their power was slipping, that's when they got the most dangerous. By nightfall, the precinct had thinned out. The public's eyes were on them now. The FBI had sent inquiries, and news vans were parked just outside the station. That meant Kane and his men couldn't be reckless. They needed a quiet solution, and Ethan was running out of time. Inside the cell, the air was heavy with the kind of tension that comes before violence. Officer Julia Brooks returned, this time not even pretending to check his injuries. She knelt next to him, whispering low. "They're moving you tonight. No cameras, no records." Effed. Ethan didn't react, but his mind raced. A quiet transfer. No body cams, no reports. He wouldn't make it to wherever they were taking him. "How many?" Ethan asked. Brooks hesitated, then 4, maybe 5. All Kane's men. Ethan nodded. "I need your help." Brooks swallowed hard. She was already in deep, but this was crossing a line she might not come back from. "If I do this, I can't undo it." Ethan held her gaze. "You don't have to. But if you don't, they win." She exhaled sharply. Then, for the first time, she made her decision. She was in the extraction. At 2 a.m., the precinct was nearly silent. The plan was simple. Move Ethan out the back, claim he was being transported to a county facility. No paperwork, no questions. The hallway lights flickered as 2 officers approached his cell. "Let's go," one of them muttered. Ethan didn't resist as they grabbed him, yanking him forward. They wanted an excuse to beat him, but he wasn't giving them one. They led him through a back corridor, past darkened offices and the evidence room. He counted their steps, mentally mapping the exits. There were only seconds left to act. Then, just as they reached the rear exit, the lights cut out. A power surge. The second it happened, Ethan moved. His elbow drove into the throat of the officer on his left. A quick pivot, his shoulder crashed into the other. The dark worked in his favor. Confusion. Panic. Then came the sound of a door unlocking. Brooks. She had done her part. Ethan ran. Behind him, Kane's men recovered, shouting orders. Gunfire cracked the night air. But Ethan was already gone. Ethan Grayson ran like his life depended on it, because it did. The cold night air burned in his lungs as he sprinted through the alleyways behind the Crestview Police Department. Gunfire cracked the silence. Bullets ricocheted off brick walls. But Ethan kept moving, his military instincts guiding every step. Kane's men were close. Too close. He didn't have much time. He needed to disappear before they locked the town down. Up ahead, an old service tunnel cut beneath the city, a relic from decades ago. Ethan veered hard, slamming his shoulder into the rusted door. It groaned, but didn't break. Footsteps pounded behind him. Ethan threw himself against the door again. This time it gave way, sending him sprawling into darkness. He scrambled to his feet and slammed the door shut behind him, just as his pursuers rounded the corner. "Where the hell did he go?" one of them barked. Ethan held his breath. A flashlight beam cut through the crack in the door. Ethan pressed himself against the cold cement, his muscles coiled tight. Then, silence. They moved on. A desperate call. Ethan didn't stay long. He couldn't. Emerging on the other side of the tunnel, he found himself in a construction site, half-built roads, heavy machinery, and the perfect place to disappear. He needed a plan. Fast. His hands still ached from the cuffs. His ribs burned from the earlier beating, but he had to push through. He spotted a payphone near an abandoned gas station. It was a gamble. Kane's men could be monitoring calls. But he had no choice. He dialed. The line clicked. Then a familiar voice. "Kane." Lauren, his sister. "Had thought I'd call the shots?" Ethan exhaled sharply, forcing himself to keep his voice steady. "I need your help." Lauren didn't hesitate. "Tell me where you are." Ethan scanned his surroundings. He had to be smart. If she came directly to him, she'd be a target too. "I'll come to you. But I need you to do something first." A pause, then, firmly, "Name it." Ethan gritted his teeth. "You need to go on air. Now. Tell everyone I escaped." Lauren went silent. Then, "That's a death sentence, Ethan." "No. It's insurance." He inhaled. "If the world knows I'm alive, Kane can't make me disappear." Lauren understood immediately. "I'll make the call." And just like that, the hunt for Ethan Grayson was about to go national. The sun rose over Crestview, but the city was far from waking up to an ordinary day. Lauren Grayson's live broadcast had set everything on fire. National news outlets picked up the story. The footage of Ethan's brutal arrest, the body cam recordings leaked by Officer Brooks, and the history of abuses within the Crestview Police Department. It was all out now. And with it came the pressure. By noon, the FBI arrived. The raid. Ethan stayed hidden, watching from a safe distance as federal agents swarmed the precinct. He saw Kane standing at the entrance, his face red with fury, as FBI agents blocked officers from entering or leaving the building. He was losing control, and he knew it. Inside, the walls were closing in. Officers who had once stood by Kane now scrambled to cut deals. One by one they flipped, exposing the planted evidence, the false arrests, and the violent tactics used to keep the town under Kane's thumb. When the FBI finally came for him, Kane didn't go quietly. He reached for his gun. But this time, he was outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. By nightfall, Victor Kane was in handcuffs. Justice served. 2 days later, Ethan walked through the same front doors of the precinct, as a free man. The officers who had brutalized him, gone. The corrupt system that had tried to silence him, exposed. Brooks, now working directly with the FBI, met his eyes as he passed. "Guess you were right," she said quietly. "The system wasn't unbreakable." Ethan gave her a small nod. "It never is." Across the street, Lauren waited with a camera crew. This time, Ethan walked into the light on his own terms. The battle wasn't over. There were still cases to reopen, wrongful convictions to overturn, and a town that needed to rebuild. But the fear that had once ruled Crestview, it was gone. This wasn't just a story about one man's fight against corruption. It was about the power of truth, the cost of silence, and the courage it takes to stand up when everything is stacked against you. Ethan Grayson didn't set out to be a hero. He was just a man who refused to be broken. But in fighting for himself, he fought for something bigger. His story is a reminder that corruption thrives in darkness, but the moment you shine a light on it, it starts to crumble. It's also a lesson in choosing sides. People like Officer Julia Brooks had to decide whether to stay silent or take a stand. The same choice faces all of us. Do we look away, or do we speak up? Because at the end of the day, systems only change when people demand it. This story may be over, but the fight for justice is never-ending. So if you believe in stories that expose the truth and challenge the status quo, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because tomorrow's story might just be the one that changes everything.